All right, everyone. Hello and welcome back to Dan's Astrology. I'm your host, Dan. You may notice I'm doing something different in this video in that I've set up some old Macintosh computer equipment. And you may also, I'm going to just, before I get into explaining what is going on here with this other camera angle and what I'm trying to explain to you, I'm just going to describe some of the objects in the background. You may notice that not only is there a Macintosh, a Mac Mini computer setup behind me, there's also a stand-up bass and an acoustic guitar. Now, here I am. I'm located I'm a millennial and I am the child of boomer parents, one of which my mother is still alive as the widow who has survived my dad, who was a chiropractor and a jazz musician. Not a professional, I mean, there's not very many professional musicians around. He was a musician as a hobbyist, but an avid, passionate musician who basically he was playing music up until the day he died. Like he was just like going hard, rocking out right up to the point where he died. And one of the things that he did was he played stand-up bass in a jazz band. And I have become basically, it's kind of an interesting position to be in because play I the guitar and I play piano and I play keyboards, but I haven't really spent a lot of time practicing the stand-up bass or learning how to use it. And so there's also, I would also like to just remind you that I one of the things that maybe sets me apart from other people that characterizes me in a unique way is that I never got my driver's license and I've never owned a car, and basically I don't drive. So there's this thing where if like even if I did learn how to play a stand-up bass, I because it's so massive and so difficult to transport, it's sort of like it kind of puts the impetus on me to learn how to drive, to get a driver's license, because otherwise I'm stuck with this massive instrument that I wouldn't know how to get from point A to point B to play gigs or something like that. But then there's also this whole kind of question in that there is like a local. My dad was very involved at this local music school where they would do jazz stuff, and it's like even to do that is like apparently they're having less involvement in that than there's like certain like it's not really popular to have to be doing like jazz bands and jazz work. It's kind of like if I took it upon myself to learn the stand-up bass or to practice as a practice it more as a musician or something, there's some obstacle with this in that, well, basically regardless of all this stuff, this is basically it's kind of like my dad's old possessions, my dad's old karma, if you want to take it in that direction. There's something about all this where it's like by playing my dad's old bass at the same place where he used to play it with the same people, and it feels like I am trapped in this thing where I have no real option but to retrace the steps of my father and repeat whatever he did in terms of being a musician. But the thing is, part of the issue around this is when it comes to the idea of, let's say, as another option when it comes to letting go of things or releasing, like not having to hold on. Like for me, it's kind of awkward to have, like, I mean, even if I wanted to move this bass into another room so that if I was going to record this video, I mean, I guess I could just put it out of the camera shot, but nonetheless, I have this bass and that I'm not able to, I wouldn't, if I made the decision to sell the bass, my mother would probably veto me on it. Similar, so basically I also have, for example, when I was born in the 1980s, and in the 1990s, my dad got this is a Charvel Strat copy, and this is a guitar that would probably sell for maybe about like $500 or $600 Canadian. or I like at the very least $300. And it's not, it wouldn't fetch as much as like a real Fender Stratocaster. It's basically a Fender Strat knockoff with a whammy bar on the bridge. And this thing, like this is my dad's, and I've been playing this since I was a teenager. And if I wanted to sell this, I would not be able to, because like even though nobody else in my family plays guitar, all the instruments are basically it's basically the property of the family, not really the property of me. And so I live in this situation where there's a lot of objects, a lot of physical possessions that are property of my father who passed away, that I have full access to them if I want to play them. But if I want to get rid of stuff, I can only get rid of things which belong solely to me. And so it's like it creates this funny situation where it's like there's all these stuff that belong to somebody who isn't even around anymore, but we have to like keep them for the sake of his memory. Whereas my own stuff that I would use that belongs to me is within my power to choose whether to get rid of or rather to save, right? And in this, I often think about trying to downsize my possessions, my personal belongings, for the sake of, maybe like a little bit of Marie Kondo minimalism, or at least the idea that at some point, maybe my family is going to sell this house at some point in time, and that if in that process, it's obviously a good idea to just minimize the amount of possessions that you have to make the process of selling and moving somewhere else more efficient. But however, I'm limited strictly to the things that I own and possess as my own. And there's something, where I'm going with all this is that if you think, why am I doing this on my astrology channel? And there's something about there's something that I've noticed when it comes to astrology and patterns with the moon and all this kind of thing, where there's this whole idea about how the moon waxes and wanes, and you're like, there's a lot of stuff where people are talking about, let go of what no longer serves you, and being unattached, or being unburdened by the past, not living in the past with past nostalgia and stuff like that. And I have to say, there's something I recently started thinking about. I recently was motivated to get this computer thing going because I was thinking about the scanning things in, and I was going to see if I could get this old scanner of mine working on my PC, but then I found out that my scanner was only, they discontinued support for it at Windows 8. And this is all part of something that's been on my mind, that Windows 11 is rolling out soon, and support for Windows 10 has been dropped. And there's some kind of basic issue about that I struggle with when it comes to planned obsolescence and technological accelerationism. And basically, that I was not able to get my old scanner to work on Windows 10, probably was not going to work on Windows 11 either, and that in an effort to figure out how to use my old scanner, I dug out this old Mac Mini that I had, and then I managed to find, I used to actually also have a Mac VGA monitor that I sold. And so I have been in the process of purging and getting rid of all these personal belongings over the years. And it just so happened that we had these obsolete technological items: a VCA monitor, a Mac Mini, an old scanner that does not compatible. And there's this kind of thing about this whole like letting go, not being stuck in the past, being in the present moment, and all this kind of stuff. But there's something odd about it, that when I find that when you apply it to technology, it's like there's always this like pressure to have the newest, latest stuff, and that the newest, latest stuff also happens to be like laden now with all these built-in AI things or whatever that kind of, and also maybe not even very backwards compatible to old technology. And there's this kind of idea that there's maybe a dark side to this whole thing about letting go of things and just like not being stuck in the past and all this kind of stuff, that you're like there, you end up creating a such waste basically. Like all that, there's not, for me, it's not just the scanner, but it's also, I have here, this is a Roland Aerodol UA25. It's a USB 2 input. It even also has MIDI in and out, so it works as a mini audio and MIDI interface. And it's amazing because it's powered by USB. You don't even need to like give it its own power supply. And this thing is equivalent to a lot of things that you would buy from Focusrite or Arturia nowadays. You spend probably at least $500 on it. I still have the original box and the receipt. My dad bought this for between $300 and $400 back in the, I don't know, the 2000s, I guess. This is an example of obsolete gear that no longer works with all of my up-to-date operating systems. But because I have this old Mac Mini that is running OS 10.4, I was able basically to, yesterday I installed a 2008 version of GarageBand onto this Mac Mini that had, and I'm considering even trying to, I was struggling though to get OS 9 on it. Apparently there's all this freeware you can get if you go all the way back to OS 9. But I was successful in installing the drivers from this old Roland UA25 onto the Mac Mini and getting it to work with GarageBand and successfully recording myself playing acoustic guitar onto this thing, onto the Mac Mini, and exporting audio files of it, right? And so, and what's interesting about this is that, why am I doing this for my astrology channel? If you think about the planets Uranus and Neptune, during the 1990s, there was a Uranus-Neptune conjunction that was associated with the rise of internet, digital media, online culture, and then into the Y2K era. Around the time, this is also the Apple thing really peaked when we had Neptune in Aquarius, and I think there's certain what makes this resonant and why I think, I mean, I was considering I could also just have this whole conversation on some sort of other channel that doesn't have anything to do with astrology, but there's some kind of thing that happens with the archetypes and stuff like Mac, like the way that when you combine Uranus is very inventive and technological and disrupts things with its new inventions. But Neptune is more of like this sort of like quasi-religious, salvific kind of thing. And there's some people have often said that Steve Jobs and the Mac branding around the time that Neptune entered Aquarius was very like this sort of like utopian religious new age technology thing, right? And there's something about that where now Pluto is in Aquarius, right? So during the time when all this technology was new, we were in the Neptune in Aquarius era. And then around 2012 or so, that's when we had Neptune in Pisces. And now when I'm making this, we have Neptune in Aries. My last video was on Sun opposite Neptune and Sun trine Uranus and Gemini in the air signs, right? And so there's something about, also, if you consider Uranus and Gemini, there's this kind of dualism where you have the twins, right? And that in the classic computing world, the twins there's always this sort of thing where it's like Mac or PC, or as a third option, I guess you could include Linux, but because Linux is it's more of, if you're a coder, I guess, than a consumer, right? At the consumer level, the consumer choice has been split into like the twins of computing, Mac and PC. And that there's some kind of funny, like even the way that I'm recording this right now, I'm pointing my camera at my Mac setup, but I'm recording it onto my modern Windows PC. So it's like sort of like I have one computer that is modern and facing to the future, and I can download all the new stuff on it, and another computer here which is retrospective and looking back on the past. And you could say I am even stuck. I'm and there's the thing about Pluto is that people talk about Pluto in terms of purging or transformation, but also being fixed and stubborn and stuck and not willing to give up or something like that. And so in this kind of thing where there's all these objects that even if I think that, maybe I'm just torturing myself by having like I have this burden of grief that I can't let go of. My poor dad who died of a heart attack in 2013, and now I'm stuck with a stand-up bass. And when I look at this thing, I sort of like, it's irritating for me because I could learn to play it. It's not that I play a bass guitar that's not a stand-up bass, so it wouldn't be that difficult to try to play a stand-up bass. But it is, first of all, would be more appealing to play this with a band. But that's not going to happen here. I used to jam with people in this room all the time, or in other rooms in this house. But for some reason, I would have to, basically, this whole thing makes me feel like my dad as a mature adult was defined by his ability to drive around and be a functioning jazz musician by playing in jazz bands, and that in order to do that, I would necessarily have to learn how to drive, get a car, and then play in different spaces and stuff like that. And that there's more. If I wanted to just sell the bass, sell the guitar, not give up being a musician, I actually couldn't do that because my family, who doesn't play them, would veto it because they're too sentimental about the death of my dad. And so there's this kind of, you see, I'm kind of just stuck in this. There's a lot of belongings. So I'm basically, there's all this pressure to just like look at all this old stuff that you have that is like, that represents where your soul is stuck in the past and not living in the present moment, and just get rid of it, even if it means throwing it into a landfill, even if it means, but there's another problem, or there's another issue with this, is that there's actually, like, there's a certain, like, Pluto also stands for a kind of riches. Like there's the riches of the underworld. There's a sort of like, if you forget about this stuff about when it comes to having all the latest technology in terms of whatever would be compatible with like a Windows 11 setup, or being able to run all the latest games or something like that. Let's say all you want to do is scan some pictures in. This Mac setup here works like a charm. Like it's like a little workhorse. I'm amazed, basically. I have an old Mac laptop too that I can turn on and it still works, but when I try to use Ableton on it, it doesn't really work very well. I think if I use like I have all this really ancient old school technology, and I have basically just been, for some reason, I've been possessed. I've felt this compulsion to get it all running again and just start like playing around with it. And it's like, I have to admit that I may be like somewhat scattered, because first I'm like, okay, I'll set the scanner up, see if the scanner works. And then there's this like dopamine hit of reward in that, oh my God, this scanner that I would think that I would have to like get rid of, send to the landfill, and this thing that scans pretty good quality, high resolution images that still works, which is just Abandon-Ware. This part of this techno acceleration thing, which is just like, to make money, you just have to sell people the same person who spent all this money on it a decade ago, you have to get them all to buy the same thing over and over and over and over again, and then create this huge mountain of garbage. It's like this. It's an insult to the soul, basically. I was also, as an aside, before I recorded this morning, I was just clicking random YouTube recommendations, and there's somebody talking about manifestation, and that they're saying that, if you manifest things in your life like material objects or possessions or belongings, then, there's this whole ideology behind that where they say that they're kind of playing off this funny idealistic thing where all the material things are actually the matrix, the illusion. So it's like, you're like, oh, if you're at the level of material objects don't have a soul. They're just part of the illusion of the material world. And it's like, well, what if there is this thing what if the material object does have a soul, right? What if the Roland UA25 audio interface box remembers all the music that was recorded on it, and that if you take this thing that sits in your closet that's been forgotten and abandoned, and you manage to plug it in and you make it work, and this poor little thing that's been neglected gets to hear the sound of a guitar and gets to do what it was created to do and record music onto a computer. What if this thing rejoices and is happy that all the minerals, all the Earth's resources that have been put into creating this thing that has been designed with the loving intention of allowing the average consumer musician to realize his dreams in the medium of digital recording? That this thing gets to continue forevermore because it's still functional, it still achieves that purpose, right? Like this thing, I can, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I don't need to buy a new computer every 5 years. I can just plug this thing into my nostalgic Y2K era retro millennial core nostalgia setup, and I can record in GarageBand, or maybe I can even get OS 9 on there and start recording into Cubase or something. I don't know, man, but I just been like geeking out on this. Or given all the political stressors, this crazy environment that we're in with whatever's happening in politics post-eclipse, I've just been motivated to just play around with this as a little project. And it's like there's something rewarding about it, because if you think about, like, if you were to like start out from scratch, like you've never done this before and you're like a complete beginner, a complete novice, and you would be like, oh, I have to go shell out probably over $1,000 for a computer, probably $500 for an interface. And if I want to scan pictures in, I have to spend another, it's like you have all this stuff that you could either be like, if you just throw that away, give it to the landfill, versus like if you're able to like make use of that, and you just sort of forget the fact that this is obsolete. If it achieves the task that you want it to do, you're essentially creating the value of thousands and thousands of dollars worth of equipment that is basically made in, like, this whole system of capitalist growth and expansion just reduces all this stuff that used to be valuable into shit because it demands everybody has to like have the latest stuff all the time, right? And that there's this constant, like, you have to just you're under this compulsion to just purge everything, and then just be like, I'm gonna live in like a miniature house that's the size of a tool shed, and I'm going to own nothing, and I'm going to enjoy, like, this is kind of fun. It's like there's some kind of issue here about like the World Economic Forum and this stuff about not owning stuff and then paying cloud rent to corporations. Let's not even get into the fact that there are what kind of apps I might have on this, what kind of programs that I might have on this, that because this is now obsolete, it'll never connect to the internet. And because it's never going to connect to the internet, I never have to worry about paying subscriptions or those kind of, I can just have this old stuff that just works, that I don't have to worry about verifying it or keeping the licenses or upgrades or anything like that. It's just like you have your time capsule computer, and it's like there's something about the ideology anyways of like we're always saying it's wrong to be stuck in the past. We always have to like just let go of things, and we always have to just purge, and we always have to we convert our like there is or materialism, right? There's some issue about what attachments, belongings, materialism, and it's supposed to be like a virtue to live a really austere, non-materialistic life where you're not attached to all these material things, and that you can just like sell everything off and then just move to a little tiny cabin in the woods where you don't own anything, and you're just like at peace because you're not like having all this anxiety about like, oh my god, my every time I see these instruments, it reminds me I'm not good enough of a musician, and that nobody wants to hear me play music, and I should probably just quit, and I should probably just sell it. Oh, but I can't because they're not mine. They belong to my dad. They actually belong to my family, but they don't. Like it's like that whole fuck around. Like, what if I just lived in a tiny cabin in the middle of the woods and I wouldn't have to deal with all this stuff? What if I was just happier like that, right? Like you could also say that this. I mean, I got all this set up when I was going to school there's some people go to school for like graphic design. I've actually seen some people make making videos about this on the internet where they talk about becoming a graphic designer and getting burnt out or getting your whole enthusiasm for that kind of world drained. I ended up just working in digital production media for a while that wasn't specifically maybe even all that design related, but for me it is interesting because I have all this old stuff that there are files that are kind of like the time capsule that represented a certain era of my life, but I can just have that on an external hard drive, and I can just have I can have this as a kind of a clean slate, but it's like it's still even just like there's something about using the old Mac out of like this Mac operating system that's like a time capsule from like some other era of my life, and it's some kind of like it feels weirdly transgressive, right? In a way that you're like I'm somehow like cheating, or I'm somehow like getting away with it, that I can like have a second PC that is like a time capsule of millennial nostalgia that is this kind of stuff is like highly fetishized nowadays, and that there's some sort of like abstract kind of value in this that you can just kind of like inhabit. You can put on this. Look at the background. It looks like a Kondo Twins album cover, even, right? And there's part of what I've been doing with this so far is that I have, in my whole this theme that I'm talking about, when it comes to either this impulse to purge things, to downsize my personal belongings, so that if I ever do have to sell my house and move, and I can just sort of like minimize and simplify and all this kind of stuff, then I have a collection of books and stuff like that. And I often find this thing happens when I think about what books I want to give away, that even the things that I think I'm most likely to give away or that I don't like, there's something about them which seems important or valuable or something. And this relates to I'm thinking about making a video about this. And it basically has to do with being somebody who's into Carl Jung, and that the relationship that I have with my family is partly that I was raised Unitarian. My parents were really into like the whole Joseph Campbell power of myth stuff. But I think when it comes to Jungianism, that's kind of like as far as they went with it. They kind of had like this sort of Unitarian Universalist combined with a kind of a little bit of pop Jungianism by way of Joseph Campbell, as in there's some sort of universal archetype that shows up across cultures, across different religions, and all this kind of stuff. But my mother is not really possessed to really spend a lot of time really getting into Jungianism or religious stuff. For some reason, this is maybe just a quirk of me. I'm more interested in that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, one of the things that my mom gave me was this book. I think she might have just found this at a thrift store or something. I'm not sure where she found this, but this is called Jung and a Journey of Transformation by somebody called Vivian Crowley. And there's something about it where I have to, sometimes I'm self-conscious about trying to make content for YouTube and trying to like make, astrology content or talk about things like Jungian archetypes or different philosophical or psychological things or whatever. And there's something about this book which is like, it's like thinking about getting rid of it because I'm sorry, I apologize to the people that made this, but it's got to be, like at first glance or just like by flipping through it, it has to be, there's so much stuff in it which bothers me or that just like sets off, like there's things that I find interesting or inspiring about Jungianism, and there's the other things which just irritate me about it. And to list off a few of them, like the stuff about Myers-Briggs personality test stuff, where you're either like this whole thing of like, are you a thinking type or are you a intuitive type? Are you a, judging or are you perceiving? Or are you introverted or extroverted? Are you this or are you that? Are you like, and you're like, wow, I can understand myself by like seeing myself fit into this type system, right? Now, I have to admit that astrology is kind of like, a lot of people relate to astrology this way, that they see the 12 zodiac signs as like 12 personality types. And there is actually true that Carl Jung was an astrologer, and that a lot of what Carl Jung was doing with the archetypes, it was very much influenced by astrology, and that the two things all click together really, really well. But there's some issue about that to treat astrology as if it's just about personality types is sort of, it's a very reductive way to understand what astrology is. And that also when I think it's like there's this problem in a bigger picture when it comes to like making content online, and whether you're producing good stuff or whether you're producing slop. And now we even have AI slop, mind you, right? There's human slop and there's AI slop. There's something about the way that I create content that I often think that I'm, I don't know, maybe I'm too sloppy, or that maybe there's something about this. I think is a book that came out, if you look at the date, it came out in like 1999, and this is like before they had before Facebook, before MySpace even, this is probably just when Google even was just getting started around, right? There's like 1999, the dawn of Y2K era internet, and it's like this is even like a time capsule in that it's kind of like of this attitude in the way that you're going to be like, I'm going to create because Jung is kind of impenetrable, if you actually read if you jump straight to a lot of Carl Jung stuff, aside from, let's say, Man and His Symbols, or Man and His Symbols, it was written to be more accessible to the general public. So that was the first one I read when I was in high school, right? Whereas, like, if you try to read, like, Psychology and Alchemy or Aeon, it's, like, can be pretty dense. It can be pretty, like, not really the easiest read or whatever. And for that reason, people who were Jungian enthusiasts created a book like this to be like, what if somebody was a complete novice, a complete beginner who didn't know anything about Jung at all, and we're going to create this book to give you a bit of the biography to communicate to the complete newcomer what Carl Jung's life and ideas and stuff like that were all about, and in a most accessible, approachable way possible. But the end result of this is, to somebody who's like just been into this since I was a teenager, it's hilarious. But the thing is, I don't know if it's like when it comes to being inspired, I think that there's this question of like, are you inspired to do things because you can like see other people doing something, and it's easy to see why it's not very good, or you're like, well, I could easily do a way better job of that. Or like, if somebody, like, this is the whole thing. If you are if you go through so much effort to put together and print a book like this, and to me it just seems kind of like a low effort slop. And even with it comes to writing, I have to admit I only graduated high school. I've never been to university. I've never taken a college creative writing class. I've never taken any like post-secondary level education of like English or writing or anything like that. But I know like poor writing when I see it. And it's poorly written, overly reductive, and it's just like there's something about it where I was like, because this is like probably the worst book on Carl Jung that I own, like maybe I should just get rid of it. But then a couple things crossed my mind. That what if this book is so bad that it would be like better not to get rid of it, because to get rid of it would be to like risk having this out in the wild so that some person will find it and not have a good impression of Jungianism, or be misinformed or something like that. Or like what if but then I started like what if there are some what if I'm misjudging it? What if for everything that I would judge about this as being irking me about things that I don't like about Jungianism, like what if there's actually some hidden gems? What if I'm misjudging it? What if there's a diamond in the rough, right? And so what I've begun to do is that I had this idea to start scanning things in. Because I mean, I could like do this thing where I'm like doing show and tell, and I open it up and show it to the camera. But I'm like, no, if we're gonna do this, we got to do this the right way. We got to like scan it in, and we're gonna have to do properly, go over the stuff and point out exactly what's wrong with it, or exactly what my complaints are. And I sort of am not sure exactly whether this is a good idea or not. But there's this kind of issue here about like, if I have a lot of sort of my own, people talk about like how you're plagued by your inner manager or your inner critic or whatever, and that oftentimes I'm self-conscious about if I'm not very popular, or if I'm not able to do things up to the standards that other people do, or something like that, that I'm somehow like doing amateurish substandard work or something like that. But then I find stuff like this, and I'm like they managed to print this whole book and distribute it, and it's like, if these people can do it, by God, man, I should have something to offer. If this is the stand, like it's like kind of like setting the bar kind of low, though, right? So the other thing is that I feel like I should, instead of trying to making my whole project about criticizing things that I feel are not very good. This is the whole thing. It's easy to be a critic. It's not so easy to try to produce your own work and have that be criticized by other people, right? It's easy for you to be like, there's nothing I'm putting out there that is a vulnerability for me to be criticized, and yet I can just take this position where I just criticize everything everybody else does, right? And so, and in that spirit, I think it's more productive to be inspired by the things which you feel are good, that you're like, wow, this is really something beyond what I would be able to do, or that is challenging me. Instead of me being stuck up and superior, looking down on something, there are things which I can be like, wow, this is like, these people are ahead of me. I'm just an amateur. I'm just a novice. And that there's something about it where it's like, I don't think either, like at some point I'm somewhere in the middle. I'm not either one or the other. I have some sort of thing to contribute, but there's also this like, when it comes to Jungianism especially, it's a tricky one, because it's like, if you consider the kinds of, it's like a specialized niche interest, and that if you're really interested in it, I did actually go to a Jungian Society of Vancouver meeting once. And the thing about it is that I have to say I'm kind of, maybe like this is the whole thing, is that I have some kind of desire to like connect with other people and have conversations and stuff. But I tend to, like, if you go to a real in-person event, I tend to be kind of shy, or that I will just sit in the crowd, listen to the people talk or whatever. That's good enough. Nonetheless, there's a novelty in actually being in a room full of Jungians. It's almost like, to me, it feels like the Jungians are people like, everybody knows about Jordan Peterson and stuff like that, or Joseph Campbell or whatever. But like, aside from these like public intellectuals who you hear about, or people who have podcasts or something like that, it's like most people would never consider to be like, what is it like to be actually in a room where everybody there are Jungians, like card-carrying members of the Jungian Society, right? It's like there's some kind of novelty in that, and then just the kind of stuff that happens in that environment when the Jungians really start getting into it and start doing, like, this is not this normal behavior of not, or like there's some stuff that would happen in a Jungian society. I've only been to one though, mind you, but the whole dynamic in the room of a Jungian society meeting and dealing with actual real Jungians is different than, the kind of conversation that you would just have with your friends or family or coworkers, right? And in this, like, if you're talking to your friends and your family and your coworkers, like the most that they could probably approach Carl Jung would basically be at this level, right? And that to be instead of being like, I had this problem that arose basically in being exposed to James Hillman, who would be described as a kind of like a post-Jungian or a pre-Jungian even, but a person who is, there's something about most people, because they can only go so far into Jung, that even basically to go over everything in this, even if it seems kind of reductive, superficial, the approach to Jungianism, which bothers me, which it sets off all my pet peeves, and the real deal is so much more than this, right? But most people can't even get to this, or you get that deep into it, and then from there to talk about James Hillman, it's like most people, it's like I feel like the more I get into James Hillman, the more it's like I'm out to sea on a raft, just like on a desert island, like completely out of contact with society, because the most people can do is, you'd be lucky to find some people that could have a coherent conversation about like Jordan Peterson or whatever, or even like the whole, there's Jordan Peterson famously got into there's a debate between Peterson and Slavoj Žižek, and it's like, my family doesn't even know who Slavoj Žižek is, right? So like I have to I'm inhabiting this mental world where I'm like have Jung, and I have Žižek, and I have Lacan, and I have Freud, and I have Wilhelm Reich and Deleuze and Guattari, and it's like, and Artie Lang, and all this kind of stuff of what I am interested in, what I like reading about, but it becomes something that's incredibly niche and feels incredibly isolating, because the average person just isn't into this stuff. And it's also like, I don't know if it's necessarily like, when it comes to actually doing therapy too, actual real therapy is expensive, right? And I did a bit of therapy last year. I've never, there's some kind of issue too about like, what does it mean about like getting really into this topic, which is about psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, but then not even to do Jungian therapy or not Jungian psychoanalysis. And that like, maybe I'm missing the point if I'm not involved in therapy, I'm not involved in psychoanalysis, that kind of stuff. But nevertheless, what I'm faced with anyways, is to be stuck in this house with all kinds of personal belongings and possessions, and to go through a process of the desire, like with Pluto, is this something to purge, to get rid of, to get to is this like, or Marie Kondo, that there's so many things about this book which do not spark joy for me that I should just put it in the local neighborhood library mailbox and get rid of it? Or should I analyze it, scan it into the scanner, do a commentary on it, and then see what comes out of that. In the process of tackling this, I'm finding sections of this book that I may have overlooked, right? Or that there's something, even in tackling something, well, I don't know. I'm not sure if anybody's interested in this, or maybe it's too much of the spirit of like dunking on something, like my own superiority complex, that I'm in this kind of weird position where it's like I, on one hand, will read all this and scoff at it and feel superior to it, but then say, well, hold on, this person was good enough at least to get a book deal, to actually publish something, and to actually, people take this seriously enough to see that the work they were doing to publish this, even if it's for a beginner audience, was worth investing the time and energy in doing it. And me, if I have such a degree of superiority of being better than this, if I wanted to create my own book and publish something and put all my time and energy into a project, if people judge me as not being worthy of that investment, and what am I going to do? I'm going to say, is this the victim mentality? That it's like, woe is me, I'm so hard done by because I'm so talented, and yet nobody recognizes how talented I am, and that these people, that they're wrong because instead they elect people, like they make books like this, which are utter bullshit. Or and I know better, so I'm going to make a whole video series telling you about why I'm superior to these fools that made this stupid book, right? Like, it seems kind of an arrogant thing to do, and I'm aware of this, right? I would also like to point out that there's an underlying dynamic with this book that I should mention, in that if you look at the publisher, Quest Books, I know it says Theosophical Publishing House Psychology, in that if you look at, it's kind of funny because even in 1999, they have a link in here to their website, theosophical.org. I think that's what it says. If you type in the website for their theosophy, it's the website. The website's still active. So it's like this is the same. This is actually published by the Theosophical Society. And the thing is, I have to admit, there's some kind of tension that I have with the whole topic of theosophy. Maybe this is, then this also relates to, well, there's all sorts of people who might organize themselves into different sort of like, religious sects or cults or groups or, different, magical orders or something like that. And the thing about this is that in my last video, I feel like maybe I said too much about Mormonism that may be construed as being condescending to the Mormons or something. Or there's this whole topic about, there's a sensitive issue when it comes to respecting religious differences, right? But there is to me, I think it's important because I have often played around with the idea of the New Age, being a New Ager, and that the Theosophical Society, in some sense, were the original New Agers. Like, this is where it all came from, right? And that Carl Jung, in his book Ion, was literally talking about the age of Aquarius, the coming of the New Age, and there's something about the Theosophical Society loves Carl Jung. They love they love astrology in the New Age, and that they love the studying of all sorts of ancient mysticism traditions and incorporating those together. And in some way, I probably have more in common with the Theosophists than I have not in common with them. But the problem is specifically that I think it's like, there's also, I've noticed that on the Theosophical Society website, they are hosting a upcoming talk with Ken Wilber. And in my last video, I got really into this Ken Wilber integral stuff, talking about some of the issues to do with the religious delusions about the rapture, all this kind of stuff. It's like a kind of, it's almost like there's a kind of a resonance around both Jungianism, the age of Aquarius, Pluto in Aquarius, is making this aspect to Mars that is at the time I'm making this video, there's this thing about what I'm saying, even Aquarius itself, right? Like you've got Neptune in Aquarius, as I said before, being this old like Y2K era, when Mac and Steve Jobs were like on the rise, and Pluto being like either the urge to purge all this old stuff or digging out my old Neptune, like Pluto in Aquarius. It's like I'm digging out my Neptune in Aquarius era equipment and finding that it still works, and finding that it can still be useful in terms of scanning things in, or I can even make my old audio interface work with GarageBand, right? There's a certain kind of like, and this is in the same sense, the archetype, what's the rapture all about? Is the archetype of redemption and salvation, that the true believers will be saved and redeemed, right? And so what about when it comes to the millennial core retro computing, that am I expected that the good moral thing to do is to just let go of what no longer serves me and return all these valuable electronic commodities to the landfill or the recycling depot? Or do I save these poor, obsolete technological items from obsolescence by putting them to use? And but the problem is that the project on my mind is to dunk on this silly Jungian book. But this is also another thing. Do I just pass this on, give it to other people, turn this book loose into the wild? Or should I could even do both. I could scan in certain sections of this, and then I could set it free. I could set it loose to the wild, and then I could take the scanned in things and make a video, and so that it's like your junk is actually raw material. It's like the Saturnian lead of areas of ignorance. Maybe even in the process of analyzing the stuff in this book, I might even come to some newfound revelation that instead of criticizing this thing and feeling superior about it, maybe even the thing that I would make fun of has something to teach me. You ever think about that? Yeah. Okay. This is I'm just giving you an update about where I'm at with this. And in order to not get swept up in all the drama of politics, the climate of fear and hysteria and paranoia and all that, I recommend, maybe setting up a retro nostalgia computing setup, right? It doesn't even have to be Mac. I just happen to have all this old stuff that's obsolete by today's standards, but I can still make it work. And I'm just having lots of fun playing around with it and seeing what I can do. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for an update. Perhaps, maybe I'm going to stay tuned for this project. Peace and love, unity and respect to all our theosophical brothers and sisters out there. Thanks for watching.